Dadiao. So now let's talk about Gemini, Virgo, and Mercury. Mercury is the planet of deciding how to live our life, coming up with a life plan both for short-term and long-term goals. Mercury is the planner. He is the one that says, I want to get somewhere in my life. I want to have a certain level of, well-being in my life. I want to be able to fulfill my needs regularly. I want my life to be efficient so that every time I fulfill a need, it's not going to be a big battle, okay? I want it to come easily, okay? I want to have enough, food in the fridge and not have to go to the store every time that I'm hungry. This is a simple way of looking at Mercury, right? When Mercury goes shopping, he goes and he buys enough food to fit into the fridge so that he doesn't have to shop for a week, right? He doesn't buy a month's worth of food, right? And then come home and not be able to put it in the fridge and it all goes bad and now you have this rotten food for a month at home. Mercury is the planet that lets us have efficiency in fulfilling our needs. And so Mercury is about planning and managing all, the details, right? And if we manage the details, of the things in our life, then our life is just gonna get so much better. It's gonna be a lot more balanced. And then we also get naturally more time for everything else in life, right? And that's why Mercury is just so important. People who have a good Mercury, they can do so much better in life in general, right? Because they're able to manage their life in a way so that they have time to deal with everything else, right? People with a problematic Mercury, they will usually do too much of one thing, then they get off track with that thing. And then the things they have neglected become overwhelming and stressful, right? Their life becomes chaotic because of a lack of planning and proper management. So look at Mercury and the signs of Mercury, because this is where we are trying to manage our life intelligently, right? How good will those signs be able to manage our life? Well, look at the planets in them. Mercury is a friend to the Moon, Venus, and Saturn. So those three planets are the best planets to have in Gemini and Virgo, right? They're going to help a person in their planning and in their ability to live more efficiently. Now, Mars and Jupiter consider Mercury their enemy. Right? Mars is the most difficult, actually, planet to have in a sign of Mercury because it makes it harder to plan for Mercury, right? Mars in Gemini or Virgo will also hurt itself, right? So it's always a two-way street, right? Mars is also starved by his enemy Mercury. So in the sign of Mercury, Mars just can't do that well, right? And as a result, he is also hurting the sign of Mercury. And that will make it harder for a person really to plan efficiently and to live, a balanced life, right? It will be easier to just get off track with certain things. And a person might literally just, be very impulsive about, certain things and just to pursue them at the expense of sort of everything else. A person is just not going to be able to say no when they should. They get involved with things that they better shouldn't get involved with. And so these are all sort of common things when Mars is in the sign of Mercury, right? Mars in the sign of Mercury is just makes a person just not be able to efficiently plan their life so that they have a balanced and harmonious life. And so their life basically will be a lot more stressful as a result, right? Now, Jupiter is a little different though, because wherever Jupiter is in the horoscope, in any sign, he will provide luck and opportunity. And so a person will be big on planning when Jupiter is in a sign of Mercury, right? However, they won't always find that they are happy because of the plans that they make, right? A lot of people with Jupiter in Gemini or Virgo, they make these, big plans, but then something better comes along as their original plan, and they just stick to their original plan, right? But Jupiter is really about going with the flow. It's about intuitively knowing what's best. And Jupiter knows when it's time to stick with something long-term, but he also knows when it's time to let go and to move to the next best thing. But when Jupiter is in a sign of Mercury, then these people, they make these big plans, and when something better comes along, that's, a lot more, that would actually be a lot better for them, then for them it's like, well, this is quite nice, but I've already made my plans, and so I have to keep at what I do. And so sometimes sort of that, spontaneous kind of realization that, wow, this is actually a better thing, this is actually a virtue of Jupiter. And when, Jupiter is in the sign of Mercury, he just can't do that, okay? Now, Jupiter is, of course, also the husband in a woman's chart. And, a woman with a good Jupiter, she will intuitively recognize her husband when she sees him for the first time, right? And when Jupiter is in the sign of Mercury, then the woman might just not be able to go with that amazing guy that is in front of her, right? She made her plans already for sort of the next years, and this guy wasn't part of it, and so he needs to just wait for the time when her plans are over and she's again sort of ready to incorporate the guy, and hopefully maybe that guy is still around at that time, okay? So when Jupiter is in the sign of Mercury, then a person will be really good at making plans. They plan the future way ahead, but then when really the good things come along, right, then they are just not able to, go along with them. They already made their plans. And so this, of course, diminishes, the happiness and ultimately gratitude that they can have for all the things and people in their life, right? And that's why Jupiter is considered starved in the sign of Mercury, right? In the end, it's just not going to be great to have Jupiter in a sign of Mercury, unless, of course, Jupiter is supported by his friends. Now, Mercury is neutral to the Sun, so the Sun in Gemini or Virgo won't make much difference to the fulfillment of those signs. Now, Saturn considers Mercury a friend, and so Saturn actually in Gemini or Virgo will actually benefit Mercury's planning ability, right? Saturn's nature is hardworking, and the person might, of course, work, a lot harder to make sure the plans are right. But then, hey, their plans really become just, flawless and perfect, especially if there's other people involved. The plans that they have laid out are with so much detail that really everyone else will be satisfied too. And of course, with Saturn, there's always, Saturn is in that sense special because there's always, of course, a big lesson involved, wherever Saturn is in terms of overcoming one's own self-imposed limitations that usually are some type of fears that we have, wherever Saturn is placed. So they definitely play a big role in the motivation, perhaps, why actually that person is such a tedious planner, such a hardworking manager, why that person, places so much emphasis on learning those skills and, taking care of every detail. But overall, since Saturn is, in a friendly sign, it will actually improve the qualities of Mercury which are that, of course, of life planning and life management. Okay. Now, Venus also considers Mercury as a friend, and so Mercury's planning and management, becomes so much more fulfilling, when Venus is in his signs, because of course Venus now brings along all the comforts, the enjoyments, and perhaps luxuries, right? And now it's not just about talking with other people, negotiating a deal, or planning something. Now, all the great fulfillments and pleasures of Venus, they can all become part of it, so that, the whole experience of Mercury now becomes a lot more validating and fulfilling. So now let's talk about Venus. Venus rules Taurus and Libra. Venus is the planet of finding fulfillment in this world, right? Our ability to be fulfilled by the world is ruled by Venus. And if Venus is in bad shape, then a person is just not really able to enjoy the world, right? Someone under everything that should be enjoyable, that should be fulfilling, it just ends up really detrimental for them. They might grab an apple from the tree and, think that, this is going to be so nourishing. It has all these vitamins and so many other good things. And then they eat it and then they get diarrhea. Or they get married and they think, oh, this should be such, this is, the most wonderful thing in this world. And then instead, they might just get into this very abusive relationship. And when Venus is badly afflicted, some of those things can be expected. Now, when Venus is good, then you actually get a Venusian experience that is fulfilling, right? And that, of course, makes your life so much more worthwhile, right? Of course, Venus also is supporting us in a way that it makes our life easier, right? When we feel good, when we are in love, when we have butterflies in our stomach, or just when we feel nourished by, the things and the people of this world, right? We feel that our life just gets easier, right? And so, to no surprise, Venus also rules cars and other, vehicles that we use for transportation. Why? Because cars, they make our life easier, right? Instead of walking for 20 miles every day to your job, you can now drive there in like 20 minutes, right? That's a fulfilling experience, right? And that makes our life just so much easier. And, when Venus is in good shape, then those Venusian things, they give us that feeling that, wow, our life is just, it makes us feel good. It nourishes us, right? We gain so much good energy, right? That we can then, of course, also use for all the other things in our life. But if Venus is beat up, then, this is like having a car that is sort of constantly breaking down, and your life, has, there's just constantly so many problems that drain all the energy out of you, and life just becomes so much harder, okay? Now, we can't just look at Venus alone. Of course, we also need to look at the signs of Venus to find out about our capacity to be fulfilled by the things and people of this world, right? If a person has afflicted planets in the signs of Venus, starved, agitated, shame planets, then the person, of course, is going to find it really hard to get fulfilled by the things of this world, right? They will find that, the things that everyone talks about that should be so amazing, the food, the clothes, the entertainment, the love and all these other wonderful things, going on holidays, buying yourself this or that. It should be like this amazing experience. But then somehow or another, it ends up not. It might just end up like a horror story or something like that, right? And yeah, so somehow or another, people with, afflicted planets in Venus, in the signs of Venus, then they just are not able to really enjoy their life all that much, you know. But many times what it actually is, there's something within them actually that keeps them from appreciating their life. And then if a person actually attracts all those things because of those sort of negative beliefs and attitudes about Venusian things, then yeah, they won't be able to enjoy them, right? And that is actually what causes all those problems, because deep down inside there's something within the person that really prevents them from having that fulfillment, right? And so then they won't be able to get it, right? Sometimes it is really that sort of attitude that gets in the way of them really being happy and having a good experience with other people, right? And then they get into all of these draining situations, painful situations, you know, heartbreaking situations, which are really just a result of ultimately their own wrong attitude. Some or another, people who have an afflicted Venus, who have planets afflicting the signs of Venus, in their early childhood, they have adopted a negative way of thinking with regards to Venusian things, and they have maintained it all throughout their adulthood. And yeah, just so that, you know, they can relive all of those sort of, you know, childhood fears and traumas. And then, yeah, paradoxically, then blame the people that they meet late on in their life, you know, for their own lack of, their own inability ultimately to be, you know, to love and be loved, you know, to nourish and be nourished by the world, okay? Yeah, but in simple terms, really, if there are troubled planets in the signs of Venus, then it's really hard to enjoy this world. Of course, the biggest enjoyments that we can get in this world is that through love, right? You can get a new car and you'll be very excited and you feel really so rejuvenated driving in this car. It's so comfortable, it makes you feel so good. But of course, it cannot be compared to, you know, the butterflies that we get when we fall in love for the first time, you know? And, you know, your ability ultimately to maintain actually that loving feeling of those butterflies is ultimately dependent on the well-being of your Venus and the signs of Venus, right? How much are you really able to generate that feeling of love in your life, right? That is really shown by Venus and the signs of Venus. So whenever you look at Venusian experiences, study Venus, and also Taurus and Libra. And an afflicted Venus, afflicted planets in the signs of Venus, of course, is going to diminish your ability to love and be loved. So now let's talk about the planets that are going to support or hinder our Venusian experience in life. So Venus is a friend to Saturn and Mercury. So those two planets in the signs of Mercury are going to support a person's ability to enjoy, to get rejuvenated by life, and, you know, to have a good love life. Now the moon is also exalted action Taurus, and that of course is going to dramatically increase, how much a person can be really happy with, all the good things that they have in their life. But this really only happens when the moon is in Taurus. When the moon is in Venus, then, that is just gonna sort of be a neutral position for the moon, because the moon considers Venus as a neutral, okay? Now, Mars is neutral to Venus too, and so when Mars is in the signs of Venus, then it will not really affect it, either way. When Venus is an enemy to the Sun and Jupiter, so as the Sun and Jupiter in the signs of Venus are going to reduce a person's capacity to really feel fulfilled by the things of the world. Again, it doesn't mean that they won't have those things. You know, the Sun shows a person whose life is actually based on an enjoyable, comfortable, perhaps luxurious life, right? Jupiter too in those signs of Venus, one's belief will be somehow or another connected to such a lifestyle, and those things will be very important for a person usually. However, a person here really needs to work on actually being happy with actually what they have, right? Especially Jupiter, wherever Jupiter is placed, he's always going to give an abundance of those things, right? Jupiter always grows and expands wherever he goes. But just because of having a lot of things doesn't mean that we are happy with those things, right? And so there's always sort of a tendency to want more and more of the good things, but still not be satisfied, right? And so this is what, you know, a person has to learn with who has the Sun or Jupiter in the signs of Venus. You know, they really have to ultimately, you know, learn to be happy, you know, with the things and the people in their life. And they have to understand that ultimately the happiness doesn't come from how much you have, but how much you're ultimately happy, you know, with what, you know, you have in your life. Okay? And for that, then you have to look at, okay, does, you know, let's say the Sun have friendly influences, right? So that they can actually develop this type of, you know, state of, you know, self-awareness and self-confidence in their life. With Jupiter, the same thing. You know, is Jupiter, let's say, you know, with his friend Mars, that will also help Jupiter to work on his, you know, belief system and, you know, his ideas about life, of what he thinks is actually, you know, sort of the purpose of life and how he can actually be happy. Okay, so yeah, remember that, you know, the Sun and Jupiter in those Venusian signs might actually give all those things, because they really have a lot to do with a person's core being and their belief system, but they might not necessarily equate fulfillment. But when, you know, the Sun or Jupiter are helped by friends, then a person will gradually sort of overcome those unrealistic expectations that they have from, you know, those Venusian experiences.